I don't have an interesting story to tell you about why I picked this book. I realized that it was sitting in a folder waiting for me to eventually get around to it. I was going to do a space opera, but people's main complaint about the book was that there was no conflict and everybody was super nice. That's boring. Fallen has a much lower score on Goodreads anyway. I just hope that this is somehow more interesting than a reading of Stalking Jack the Ripper and Born at Midnight were. Without further ado, Fallen by Lauren Kate. Prologue. Or whatever this is, I don't know. All it says is in the beginning. We open in September 1854. An unnamed man draws a picture of an unnamed woman. He feels odd whenever he's around her and keeps his distance from her. They had met earlier in the evening at a party. She still thought the pull she felt towards him was innocent, that their frequent rendezvous in the gazebos were merely happy coincidences. To be so naive. He would never tell her otherwise. The secret was his to bear. This is starting off really weird and creepy, but only the prologue. Willing to see where this is going to go. Anyway, she's there now, even though it's the middle of the night. She saw his things by the door and is a little upset that he was going to leave her without so much of a goodbye. He's short with her, like he's irritated over how she's acting. After she remarks upon his drawings of her, he makes it seem like it's a big deal for him to make the decision to separate himself from her, like he literally cannot help but be pulled towards her and he's fighting against that pull. Again, this is weird and creepy, but still gonna give this at least a couple of chapters to see what's actually going on. Some context would be nice right now. He mentions a remedy that her mother used to use in order to get her to sleep. She remarks upon the connection, but he only makes a creepy, "I know" comment about her mother. She circles back around to the idea of him leaving and begs him to take her with him. She tries to say, "I love you," but he cuts her off. He even seems to think that his leaving is going to save her life. Yes, that is the exact phrase used. And then she pulls his hand towards her chest to feel her heart. And then it's that weird magnetic pull that I mentioned earlier. He just wants to ravish her. And then something seems to snap inside of her, and it's like she forgot the past couple of minutes except the vaguest sense of deja vu. He thinks to himself that he's too late, although for what, I haven't the foggiest. He kisses her, and despite the fact that he's been trying to avoid physical contact with her up until this point. But as they're kissing, this portal opens up and a dark cloud comes out unseen by the girl. It passes over her, and when it's gone, she no longer seems to recognize him at all. Okay then. I just finished the Immortal series by Alison Noel not too long ago, and maybe this is just me trying to make connections to other books that I've read, but getting a lot of the Immortals vibes from this prologue, but we'll see where the rest of the series takes us. Chapter 1. The book opens with Luce arriving late to her school, her new reform school, if you needed to set the tone for what kind of character that she is, and I literally just finished being sent to camp because I was caught at a party with underage drinking. She had some sort of accident over the summer, and she's apparently been on some sort of medication previously in her life, but managed to convince both her parents as well as her doctor that she was, as the book writes it, sane. I don't have context for this quite yet, but hopefully the book will explain why people seem to think that Luce is mentally unhinged. Luce also thought that it was weird that she'd be enrolling at the school a month after other schools started. However, there are others being given the grand tour along with her, so clearly the school does this sort of thing a lot. The setting and why Luce is there having been introduced, Luce looks at the other kids being enrolled right now. She thinks about the other school that she'd gone to, which sounds like some sort of fancy prep school for rich kids. During Luce's introductory tour, she'd met her best friend Callie. They'd been the only two non-legacy students there at the time and had a lot of shared interests. One girl is described as wearing a lot of pink and looking like a model, who introduces herself as Gabby. I'm willing to give this book a chance, but I swear that I will fling my desk out the window if Gabby turns into the standard mean girl. One guy is given a brief description, but mostly what I'm getting from him is that he also seems ashamed to be there. And then the other guy who makes direct eye contact with Luce. Their eyes meet, and it's the most magical moment, you guys. He will likely be the love interest. The person who is giving them the read-through of the campus rules has them all put their hazardous materials into a container. Luce feels weird as the other kids pull out things like switchblades and lighter fluid, and then she realizes that among the list of prohibited items are also communication items such as cell phones and pagers. When Luce hesitates, the lady tells her that she gets one phone call a week. Honestly, I think prison has less strict rules. And I'm going to pause really quick to say that I honestly don't know much about reform schools, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the author herself is probably taking a lot of liberties here for the sake of drama. Before Luce puts her phone in the box, she sees that she has a message from Callie, but her phone is old and the long message is cut off so that she can't see the entire thing of what her friend said. However, Luce is a little grateful for it since it seems like Kelly is talking about how everybody seems to have forgotten about Luce. As Luce stares at her second text from her parents, she feels weird, mainly because the story is already portraying them as absolute parents of the year, but the entire sending your kid to reform school business. Again, we don't have context to what happened to Luce. Maybe they're completely in the right to send her, but being familiar with other young adult books, I'm not exactly holding my breath that the reasoning will be grounded in real-world logic. The narration then refers to Gabby as a fembot, and I die a little more inside. The boy that Luce had made a connection with earlier offers to tell Luce about how things are run, but the instructor cuts him off and says that he's lost his privileges. Apparently he's been there before, but something happened that sent him back. Then they're taken to the dorms, which are described as gray brick covered in mold with thick bars over the windows. Luce also notes that there appears to be barbed wire on top of the wall surrounding the schoolyard. The lady tells Luce her room number and tells her to put her bag in the office for now. Also, this story takes place in Savannah, Georgia, if anybody cares or if the location is going to be somehow relevant later. Luce's parents don't live too far away from the school, and she wonders why it is that she couldn't just commute to school every morning. However, she also recalls overhearing her dad on the phone saying that it probably would be best if Luce just stayed at the school. Luce then asked the lady about the thing that she'd been saying when Luce first came in: meds, beds, reds. The lady had already covered the students who needed to be medicated at the beginning, and now she's shown them their beds. So what are reds? They are cameras all over the school recording all of the time, painted bright red so that the students will not forget that they are being watched. Then we start to delve into what happened to Luce. She'd been in some sort of party at a cabin with somebody named Trevor. They'd been kind of running around outside, and enough of that. We can't be divulging the entire plot in the first chapter now, can we? But every single person, from her parents to judges to social workers, have tried to pry the truth out from her, but every single one of them makes Luce think that she's guilty to the point where she's questioning her own mind. As if sensing the dark place Luce's mind is going, the lady then reassures Luce that she's hardly the worst case that the school has seen. However, it does little to ease Luce's mind. And then the lady gives them a map of the school and tells them to get to class in an hour. A random girl pops up to taunt them. However, the lady is far from pleased about this and punishes the girl by telling her to guide Luce around the school for the rest of the day. Under the dress code section, the Sorting Cross website had cheerily maintained that as long as the students were on good behavior, they were free to dress as they pleased with just two small stipulations: the style must be modest and the color must be black. Nothing quite like trying to force that gothic aesthetic into the book. And then we get another snippet. There had been a fire at the cabin that had burned most of Luce's hair off. Following the incident, her mom had completely shaved Luce's once long hair, which I'm sure probably didn't exactly help Luce with not making her feel crazy. As the girl, Ariane, takes Luce back into the main building, the boy from earlier tells her that they aren't afraid to strip search and to just save herself the trouble and drop anything else she's hiding into the box. Ariane refers to the boy as Cam. Ariane then takes Luce back outside, so I'm not quite sure what the point of that detour was. There, Luce gets a better look at the other buildings, which all seem to be grouped around an overgrown common area field. There are 4 other buildings: the dorms, a church, and 2 buildings that Luce assumes are for classes. As they sit in the grass, Ariane says that most of the staff there have an indeterminate gender, including the person who'd been showing them around. Ariane thinks that the person is a lady, but again, who actually knows? Luce then thinks of her old school and how the two of them are so different from one another. She tries to imagine Ariane at the school and what Callie would think of her. Ariane then asks why Luce is there. Luce just feels this overwhelming sense of panic over having people ask her this. She also feels guilt over Trevor. No one knew about the murky shapes she sometimes saw in the darkness. They'd always come to her. They'd come and gone for so long that Luce couldn't ever remember the first time she'd seen them, but she could remember the first time she realized that the shadows didn't come for anyone, or actually anyone but her. When she was 7, her family had been on a vacation in Hilton Head, and her parents had taken her on a boat trip. It was just about sunset when the shadows started rolling in over the water, and she turned to her father and said, "What do you do when they come, Dad? Why aren't you afraid of the monsters?" Enter the standard nobody but the main character can see things trope, I guess. And going along with this trope, the young Luce was then dragged off to various doctors for various things. She was put onto meds, but then she eventually refused to take them, especially because being on them did not make those things go away. And then she learned how to lie, as all good protagonists who see mysterious supernatural things nobody else can figures out. She lies and acts normal, and then she is no longer treated like a thing that needs to be studied. Luce doesn't actually answer Ariadne, and I assume that she just sits there and disassociates for like 5 minutes. Well, at least this seems like the kind of place where people would probably do that. Maybe Ariadne is used to behavior like this. Finally, Ariadne says that she wants to cut her hair like Luce's. Luce seems upset at the thought because Ariadne's hair was so long and pretty, like Luce's used to be. Ariadne then pulls out the knife one of the other kids had dropped into the no-no box and says that it's stealing from the newbies that gets her through the day. Luce asks if Ariadne was there the entire summer, and Ariadne seems to think that it's cute that she thinks that they get to go home for the holidays and school breaks. "We don't get to leave this hellhole, ever. Now cut." Gonna go ahead and say that that sounds super suspicious and not normal at all. Ariadne then calls Luce a pansy and tells her to hack her hair off. So Luce starts to do it, but is surprised by the scars on the back of Ariadne's neck, almost like a big burn. Luce asks how it happened, but Ariadne only brings up about how Luce clammed up and refused to answer the same question. Guess it's probably a pretty common thing around there. To be fair, these kids have probably been through some shit and deserve to be quiet about a few things. Ariadne then points to one of the two unknown buildings and calls the building Augustine. She says that it's where social events are held every Wednesday. Oh, and the dorm building is called Pauline. I don't know why ugly brick buildings need to be named, but okay. Ariadne then confirms that classes are held in the last unknown building. She warns that the classes will suck your soul out, and then makes a joke about being soulless. But that's not what surprises Luce, but rather that there are only 80 kids there. Ariadne agrees and says that with so few people around, everybody is always up in your business. Ariadne also warns Luce to stay clear of the hard cases who are identified because they're wearing tracking monitors on their wrists. Ariadne references that some of them are terrorists while others committed parricide. Luce isn't sure that she's joking, but it's a reform school. They wouldn't slap monitoring cuffs onto people who were innocent. As Luce finishes up Ariadne's haircut, she then notices that Ariadne is wearing a tracking bracelet. Ariadne then leads Luce over to the church building, but explains that it's the school's gym. She says that the people who run the school probably thought that troubled youth could exercise their way into better behavior or whatever. And there's a cemetery, as if the fact that this was supposed to be some sort of gothic novel escaped all of you. And naturally, the fog is so thick that Luce can't actually see the cemetery on the other side of the dorms. Ariadne explains that the school used to be a military school back in the day of the Civil War. Naturally, the kids from the school hang out in the graveyard. Ariadne then drags Luce closer, where they see most of the rest of the student body. Like at any school, there does appear to be cliques, but a little different than in a normal school. We've got female biker gang, couple who can't stop making out with each other, and preppy boys. As Luce stares at the preppy boys, she suddenly realizes that all of them are there because they have a past, and suddenly she no longer feels quite so alone in that regard. As Ariadne instructs Luce to sit and join the others, Luce then spots somebody who is breaking the black-only dress code. He is described in such great detail that I'm now wondering if he isn't the actual love interest, especially because Luce herself thinks about him in terms of romance novel love interests. Look, I like meta, but only when it's actually funny. This is just stupid. She also feels a little insane after she can't stop picturing herself in the guy's arms, which, yep, this guy is totally the love interest. Ariadne says that the boy is Daniel Grigori. The guy that Daniel is talking to is Roland, who is good at getting his hands on things. Luce asks what Daniel is in for, but Ariadne says that nobody really knows. As Luce continues to stare at Daniel, their gazes meet, and Luce feels like she knows him. And OMG, you guys, they have and Daniel flips Luce off. So much for that. And then the bell rings and they all go to class. And as Luce is going, she looks back and notices Daniel watching her. And, whew, That was an insanely long chapter. I was excited when I saw that this book only had 20 chapters, but now I'm realizing that it comes with the price of having much longer chapters. And I know that I usually like to give books a little while to find itself, but at the same time, I'm now a whopping 35 pages into this, and already I feel like this book is on thin ice with poorly represented mental illness, how the court system works, bad parents, and reform schools. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and be here next Monday. Don't forget to check out my other video Snark series. If you're new here, then I also run a Tumblr where I post daily book Snark. I also have a Patreon where I post early releases of my daily Snark, but also bonus Snark that isn't up anywhere else. Plus, all supporters get a big shout out. Thank you so much to Donna and Phoebe for supporting me already. You can hear your name next week by joining my Patreon for $1 a month. However, since it is a recurring charge, I also accept PayPal and Ko-fi. Also, if you want to read some of the stuff that I've published, then you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have 17 erotic short stories, 1 short story collection, and 1 full-length novel. Links for all of these things will be posted below. See you next week, guys!